Gaggle will challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, that's I think that's Skippy.
Skippy.
It's Skippy. Decided to. Yeah, I'm going to take part in this live stream.
Your lap is free. You mind? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I'm taking over. Obviously dissatisfied with how we're doing. So it is now our weekly Monday morning East Coast time live stream. And how are you, Peter?
Well, trying to digest everything that's been going on the last the
So,
36 hours.
mhm,
I'd be interested in your thoughts.
mhm.
As I like to say, a lot of moving pieces. Okay, and George and I will do our best to make sense of it.
We will absolutely try. So, as things stand at this moment, while we're podcasting, the meeting in Istanbul has already come to an end. It didn't last for very long, and we can talk a little bit about the
I have my theory, but
your
go ahead.
theory. Your theory. Okay. Um, and but what I think is clearly something that we need to discuss first is the dramatic events of yesterday, in particular the drone attacks on a number of Russian airfields, and not only were these attacks on Russian airfields, but these were they were targeting Russian strategic bombers.
That's it.
Now, Russian strategic bombers are quite a serious business because, of course, Russia doesn't use strategic bombers against Ukraine because there's no need to. It's a strategic bomber. Therefore, you use them when you're firing intercontinental ballistic missiles. And since it's not Ukraine is not across the continent, there's no need to use a strategic bomber. So, this was an attack on the strategic bombers, and therefore it raises everything to a much more serious level, obviously. Um, the interesting thing, of course, is, well, first of all, why were they not in hangars that were supposed to be protected? And the
They're
reason,
supposed they're supposed to be on the tarmac.
exactly, and that's the reason, and that of course does raise a question because they are supposed to be unconcealed because those are the terms of the New START treaty, which means that they have to be available for constant surveillance. So
As are American strategic bombers as well.
exactly, because the satellites circulate, and satellites have to observe that each side is adhering to the limits agreed to in the New START treaty. But what makes this again quite interesting is that Russia in 2023 said that while it's not actually withdrawing from the New START treaty, it wouldn't continue. It wouldn't actually observe the various requirements, which for inspections and the rest. And this clearly shows that Russia has adhered to that agreement. So essentially, Russia has remained not only in the New START treaty, but has continued to observe all of the stipulations of the New START treaty. But now, of course, that raises the next question, which is, well, how did Ukraine know where these strategic bombers are located? I mean, it's not just something everyone knows. Oh, yeah, you go, a few miles here, turn left, and then you'll come to a strategic bomber. So somebody had to have disclosed the precise location
Well,
of bomber. Okay, go
I
ahead.
think we really have to say it's important here. As George has already mentioned, the start we have the SALT, and it evolved into the START agreements. These were between the Soviet Union and the United States, and Russia and the United States. Ukraine is not part of this convention, this treaty. This is very important to point out because I have no doubt in my mind. I think it's a simpleton can come to this conclusion that there was Western intelligence help with this
Mhm.
huge operation. It was huge. the reporting that's going on in Western media, 1/3 of Russia's strategic bombs, that's nonsense. $7 billion. I mean, who pulled that out of the air? Okay, I mean, I'm referencing here. I just watched the BBC little report on it. It's just typical BBC nonsense. Okay, so they're over exaggerating it. Is it a public relations defeat for Russia? Yes, of course it is. I mean, it's a real propaganda win for the Ukrainians. That does not change the battlefield situation on the ground. Here we go. I'm making a program tomorrow. I'm calling it Spectacle, because is this what this is? It's spectacle. Now, Russian intelligence. There was a Russian intelligence failure. There's no doubt about that. And they used the communication systems in country. That's not going to happen again. The reason why I'm interjecting this here is that what the arms control agreements that the United States and Russia have, which are in deep freeze right now, as George has pointed out, but they are the foundations to move forward. That has been compromised. The Russians are furious. Of course they are with the Zelensky crowd. They're furious with the White House right now. They're furious. Did Trump know, or did he didn't know? The implications are the same.
Well, I would say
I would argue that.
Well, what I would say is I almost certainly Trump didn't know, but the reason I'm saying that is that when you're conducting an operation of this magnitude and of this delicacy, you don't want to tell the president. I mean, basically, you want to have always the plausible deniability, precisely because you don't want the president to be in a situation of saying, no, I didn't know, and then he turns out he was lying that he did know, or admitting that he did know and that therefore he's compromised. That's always that's standard operating procedure.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think that's going to. I think that's a given, but I think the Russians are not going to. They're not going to really care. Okay.
Well, I don't think they know. Yeah, no, they don't. They don't really need to pay attention to that. But you have to keep in mind that we had last week, and this is what the Russians said. The Russians said that there was a drone attack on the helicopter that was carrying Putin in Kursk. That was the Russians who said that. It wasn't the Americans. It wasn't the Western media. It was the Russians who said this was a drone attack on the president. That was a serious. If that's true, then that's a serious level of escalation. But nothing much was said afterwards, and there was very little coverage in the Western media. I mean, no one dismissed it, but no one actually even reported it. So you have to think that only encouraged this much more serious escalation today. Now, when you say it's a spectacle, I agree. Strategically, it's not. It doesn't really affect the battlefront. But that's never really been the way this war has been fought. I mean, this war
at least on one side,
at the level of public relations, and
exactly.
and at this stage, what Zelensky and the Ukrainians, and of course the Ukraine lobby, is trying to do is to say, hey, Ukraine's a going concern. Don't write Ukraine off yet. Hey, we can still fight. Just give us more and more ammunition. And then you have to think about what was Lindsey Graham doing in Kiev just a day ago, and along with Richard Blumenthal. What were they doing there?
Well, remember, George, before Victoria Nuland went off into the sunset, what were the words? We have some pretty nasty things.
That's right. We have some pretty nasty surprises. Yeah,
nasty surprises. There you go. Right. That's it. Yeah. One of them, at least.
Right. Yes, that's right. So if we just look at, this was the stories that were in the Western media, as you reported. This was how. So first of all, the day started rather nastily yesterday because we had this attack on two Russian bridges, one of which collapsed onto a passenger train, killing.
This is an MI6 specialty, everyone. Sorry, but
yes, I think so. And so here, this says this occurred. This was in Kursk and Bryansk, and it says around 11 p.m. on Saturday, the investigative committee said an overpass collapsed in the western region of Bryansk as a Moscow-bound passenger train traveled underneath. And then local governor Alexander Bogoma said falling debris caused the train to derail, killing 7 and injuring at least 73. And then hours later, the investigative committee said a train collapsed onto a road after crossing a damaged railway bridge in Kursk, injuring 3 train workers at around 3 a.m. No deaths were reported in the second incident. I agree with you. I think it's an MI6 operation. And then this is the map of the attacks on the air bases. You can see the 5 air bases. And as we'll see, the Russians only admit that I think 2 air bases were hit.
Because at the other locations, apparently the transformed truck malfunctioned, or at least elements of the. I'm not good at this stuff, but the roof that was supposed to lift up, apparently there were malfunctions. So that's not widely presented in the Western news feeds on this.
And here was Zelensky's exuberant tweet from yesterday. He says, an absolutely brilliant result, a result achieved solely by Ukraine. Now, this is very interesting. Why
do you say it then?
What?
Why do you say solely by Ukraine?
Exactly. Why do you say it? Exactly. Very interesting. That's really right up front, up at the top. You say it, to assure everybody it was solely by Ukraine, no one else. 1 year, 6 months, and 9 days from the start of planning to effective execution, our most long-range operation and our people involved in preparing the operation were withdrawn from Russian territory in time. I thank General Malyuk for the success of Ukraine. I instructed the Security Service of Ukraine to inform the public about the details and results of this operation that can be disclosed, and then so on. So that's his exuberant tweet. And then
the day before Istanbul.
Okay. Exactly. Incidentally, so as I said, we'll come to Istanbul in a minute, but he was in Vilnius today because there's a NATO summit taking place in Vilnius. There's always a NATO summit taking place somewhere. This is the B9. And so people say, "Oh, what's the B9?" The B9 is the Bucharest 9.
Yeah, what is the B9?
Oh, the B9. Oh, can I join the B9? But it's the Bucharest 9. So
it looks like I'm not keeping up. I'm just
no, because there's so many of these bureaucratic entities that you can't really keep up. Apparently, there's something called the B9, the Bucharest 9, and Zelensky toddled off to the B9, and there he enjoyed the backslapping from Mark Rutte, the NATO secretary.
I think that it should be renamed Benign. Okay.
Benign, except that they're not terribly benign.
Well, they can cause mischief. That's for sure.
Yes, okay. Absolutely. So here then, So anyway, it goes on. This story. This is from Axios. Axios is very interesting because that's the insider's insider.
And they flipped on this story, didn't they? Keep going.
Yeah. Then it says, because they say that Ukraine did not notify the Trump administration of the attack in advance, a Ukrainian official said. And then it says a U.S. official also told reporters the Trump administration was not made aware of the attack. But what would you expect them to say? I mean, they're not going to admit. No one's going to admit to being involved in this. So just because they deny it, doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but what does that also mean? I didn't call I made a cold call to the White House. I didn't call, and I didn't tell anybody. I mean,
Right.
again, this is just kind
Right.
of smoke and mirror. George is right. Who's going to say, "Oh yeah, I got the call"? Okay. I mean, nobody's.
I signed off on this. Trump, curiously enough, hasn't said anything. At least just before we started, I hadn't seen any message from Trump, um, which isn't good because this, Trump was kind of shooting his mouth off last week about how annoyed he is with the Russians, annoyed he is with Putin. Yet he's got nothing to say about this attack, particularly attacks on the passenger train just a few hours before this meeting in Istanbul that he's supposedly right behind. He's supporting strongly, and he's got nothing to say about this. Um, And then it says a Ukrainian official told Axios the operation was conducted by the country's security service as was planned for more than a year. And then the official said intelligence officers launched attacks drones from trucks that have been covertly placed near Russian air bases, and then around 40 Russian military planes, among them strategic bombers, were reportedly hit in the attack. These are the Ukrainian claims, so that's just what they say. 40 were hit, and then
Or it's been translated into Western media parlance as a third of Russia's strategic
That's right, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
aircraft. Okay,
Yeah,
which is this is their propaganda.
that's right. A Ukrainian official said the planes that were attacked were used by the Russian military for airstrikes on Ukrainian cities. But these were strategic bombers, so those are not used for airstrikes on Ukrainian cities. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed air bases in 5 different parts of Russia were attacked. In 3 of the region, the attacks were repelled, the ministry claimed. And then, according to the ministry, several aircraft caught fire but have been extinguished following the attacks in Murmansk and Irkutsk regions. And then, this is a Reuters story. The Ukrainian Secret Service were able to attack strategic bomber aircraft at Russian air bases by hiding explosive-laden drones inside the roofs of wooden sheds. And then the SBU acknowledged it carried out the operation, codenamed Spiderweb, and said it had caused considerable damage. And then the sheds were loaded onto trucks that were driven to the perimeter of the air bases. The roof panels of the sheds were lifted off by remotely activated mechanism, allowing the drones to fly out and begin their attack. The security official spoke on condition of anonymity, said strikes were conducted on Sunday on 4 air bases and so on. And then 34, this is what you were talking about, 34% of strategic cruise missile carriers at the main airfields of the Russian Federation were hit. And then Zelensky said the SBU had set up a nerve center for the operation right next to the regional office of Russia's FSB intelligence service. But we claim all operatives taking part had been brought out on Russia on the eve of the operation. And then here's the CNN, more than 40 aircraft were known to have been hit, and then including the Tu-95 and Tu-22M3 strategic bombers, and one of Russia's few remaining A-50 surveillance planes. And then we have the $7 billion in damage. How the hell could they come up with this number, the $7 billion in damages? And hit 34% of the strategic cruise missiles. And then again, the airfields targeted, included, so on. And then this is the bases in Murmansk. And then the Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed Ukraine had targeted Russian airfields across 5 regions on Sunday. And then the ministry said the strikes were repelled in the Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur regions, but there's several pieces of aircraft caught fire after attacks in the Murmansk and Irkutsk regions. It added that the fires had since been extinguished. And then this was TASS's report. TASS says that the Kiev regime today committed a series of terror attacks on military airfields in the Murmansk, Irkutsk, Ivanovo, Ryazan, and Amur regions with the use of FPV drones. And today, the Kiev regime staged terror attacks and so on. All terror attacks on military airfields were repelled, No casualties were reported, either amongst servicemen or civilians. Some of those involved in the terror attacks were detained. As a result of the launch of the FPV drones from territories in the exact proximity to military airfields in the Murmansk and Irkutsk regions, several aircraft caught fire. The fires were extinguished. And then here the Telegraph says Trump left in dark over airbase attacks on Russia. Donald Trump was not told about Ukraine's mass drone attack on Russia's strategic bomber bases, the coordinated strikes orchestrated by Ukraine's security services, and so on.
I'm just sorry. I mean, Donald Trump was not told about Ukraine's. Can you go back to that slide?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's going on with journalism today, George, but there wasn't a comma. Okay, Donald Trump was not told about Ukraine's mass drone attack on Russia's strategic bomber bases, according to people that are close to the story, according to, as told to the Telegraph. What's going on?
Right. You're right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I mean, so the Telegraph is the source, right?
This is the Telegraph, yeah.
No, you're missing my point. I mean, they know.
Oh, I say, yeah. That's right.
The Telegraph knows. How?
Yes. 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 And then here, the Telegraph repeats: Ukraine wiped out a third of Russia's strategic bombers, and so on. And then, of course, the Telegraph.
Hey, everybody! Don't you see how a few lies just goes around the world within a matter of seconds?
Right. And then here we have inside Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb, the operation to destroy Russia's strategic bombers at 4 Russian air bases, according to Ukrainians. But notice how they say destroy. You have no idea that they've destroyed. You say they were hit. I mean, destroy, that's a big, strong word. Where you have no idea what, if any, damages have been caused. The drones, which were laden with explosives, were allegedly then hidden under the roofs of the containers and so on. And then, now this is quite interesting because this is Scott Ritter, and he sent this out. And Ritter says, the extent to which Russia can continue to show the same level of restraint as in the past is tested by the very nature of the attack. A massive use of conventional weapons which struck Russia's strategic nuclear deterrence force, causing damage. It is not a stretch of the imagination to see this tactic being used in the future as a means of decapitating Russian strategic nuclear assets, aircraft and missiles, and leadership. The attack against Putin in Kursk underscores this threat. And if Ukraine can position Kamaz near Russian strategic air bases, it could do so against Russian bases housing Russia's mobile missile forces. That Ukraine would carry out such an attack, likewise, shows the extent to which Western intelligence services are testing the waters for any future conflict with Russia. One that NATO and EU members say they are actively preparing for. We have reached an existential crossroads in the SMO. So, that's...
What were we talking about 24 hours?
Exactly.
Exactly what George and I was talking about.
Right.
In much more broader terms, but
That's
yes,
right.
Exactly.
Right. That's right. That's exactly right. That they we were talking about, well, NATO is already opening up a new front. They're already preparing the next front in the war against Russia. Clearly, it's going to be in the Baltics, and that's where they're opening up this war. And then today we have Sir Keir Starmer, fresh from having these Ukrainian Wren boys mysteriously wanting to blow up his homes, declaring that Britain has to be ready for war with Russia. And he's going to have massive increases in defense. Where the money's coming from is kind of left. It's a mystery, but we've got to prepare for this war with Russia. And
he's a war prime minister.
He's a war prime minister.
Well, I guess the term doesn't. He's a pre-war prime minister. Okay.
Yes. And so
Everybody, in light of what George and I said yesterday, he is up to being he's among the prime ministers to be considered the worst in British history. Okay,
yeah, that's right.
George and I went over you can't do that with Merz in Germany. Okay,
No, that's exactly. Yeah, he's among the. Yeah,
but
yes.
Starmer, he's in the running. He's in the running.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely in the running. It would have been an absolute fiasco from start to finish. And he's only been prime minister really for less than a year. It's hard to believe it's been less than a year. So yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. I, however, doubt, and I know maybe you disagree. I don't think Russia is going to react in a particularly escalatory fashion. That's just they haven't done this in the past, and I don't think they're going to do it now. Yeah.
Well, we shouldn't expect a exaggerated, overwhelming reaction. Why? The answer is simple. They are succeeding on the battlefield. Look at the Sumy region right now. There is I'm not going to say collapse, but the Ukrainians are giving up huge swaths of land, and this is something that is pressing on them. Yeah, this is a public relations spectacle. I mean, this morning I went through all the main websites. They're all gleeful. They're very happy, but it doesn't change anything. Russia has some security issues to look at home. Very, very serious. Okay, no one's saying, oh, it means nothing. Okay, but they're saying in the perspective of things. Now, I had a theory, and maybe I'm going to be easily proven wrong minutes after we finish this podcast. I think the meeting in Istanbul ended because Russia just gave an ultimatum. This is just it, guys. We're not going any further. I mean, chew on it, okay? But this is it. We don't need to do this again. We made a lot of progress in 2022. We almost inked it, okay? We're in the same venue. We're in the same room. We're basically the same people. And here are the demands, okay? That's my read. It's my read without the readouts, okay?
Well, it's possible. Now, what's I think interesting is that Ukraine. I mean, see, the reason I think that I mean, again, what is NATO's strategic objective in waging this war in Ukraine? They don't think they can. They don't think they can win. They don't think Ukraine can win. I mean, it's just common sense. Ukraine cannot win this war. What they want to do is to keep this war going. That's all they want, and therefore, what happened yesterday, I think the strategic significance of it. Hey, we can keep this war going. We can just go on. As long as you keep supplying us with arms and money,
okay,
we can keep it going.
Okay,
and then you have I think it's always very serious and always very dangerous as long as a war is going on. I mean, because another year, and who knows what could happen. I mean, there's always that's the Clausewitzian dilemma. War is very unpredictable. You have no idea what can happen. So that's why the best thing is to wrap it up and end it. So that's just my point. Why did they do it? They weren't hoping for any kind of a strategic breakthrough, other than we're going to inflict a humiliation on Russia, and we're going to show Trump, who has been somewhat skeptical about Ukraine, look, we're not on our last legs. Look at all the things that we can do. We're capable of doing it. Because as things stand, Trump hasn't made any new appropriation for Ukraine. All this money that's going to Ukraine now, that's still Biden money. Trump still has not gone before Congress and asked for more money for Ukraine. So that's going to be the moment for Ukraine.
It's a mystery who is briefing him. Okay, is it Marco Rubio? God help the world. Okay, but I don't remember the date, George. You're much better at this than I am. But it was over a year ago, where some of Russia's strategic satellites, for its nuclear triad.
Right. Yeah, the early warning systems. Yeah.
Right. The warnings. Thank you. The warning system. Yeah. And now we have this. There should be serious people, I hope, in the Pentagon saying this is very dangerous for everybody.
Right.
They have those early warning radars for a reason. We have them for a
Right.
reason. And you
Right.
have a third party
Right.
meddling
Right.
in all of this. Look, everybody, this war in Ukraine should have never happened. I said that long before Donald Trump said it. Okay, let's make sure it doesn't evolve into a much
Right.
greater conflict.
Right.
And that's where I hope cooler tempers are going
Right.
to make themselves heard, because this is a very, very dangerous thing
Yep.
that's going on. You don't mess with them.
Right.
This Some really, really smart people over the decades came up with this system, and it
Right.
was enough for both sides to say, yeah, I can live with this. Okay. As George pointed out at the very beginning, as far as I understand, I could be wrong here, they don't necessarily have to follow any of the requirements of of the START
I
treaties.
don't think so.
But I tend to think both sides are like, yeah, in lieu
Right.
of
Right. I mean,
what
that's, yeah. I mean,
could go wrong, let's just keep doing it. Okay.
no, I mean, Putin made that announcement. I mean, he was he who announced it. Said, "Oh, we're now going to observe the intricacies or whatever, however you formulated it, of the New START treaty. We're not going to violate the limits, but we're not going to observe all of the requirements about inspections and the rest." But obviously, Russia has adhered to that, and this is why this is where it gets quite serious, because if this information about the location of these strategic bombers, uh, this was obviously somebody had to have supplied Ukraine with that information. So Russia allows America, according to the terms of the New START treaty, to know all the locations of its bombers, their precise location, where they are at any particular time. And then America reveals this information to someone else. That seems like quite a serious violation of the terms of this treaty.
Yeah, but it goes back to a theme that you and I return to quite often, and to formulate it in the simplest terms. I mean, how important is the Russia-U.S. relationship for Trump? Because if it is important, he isn't showing it, and
Right.
that's going to be something the Russian side is going to have to consider. I
Right.
mean, you know, terror is part of war. Okay, it's
Right.
unfortunate. It's all. That's why we
Right.
shouldn't have wars. Okay,
Right.
the blowing up the trains and collapsing bridges. Okay, it's part and parcel of the kind of things the Brits are pretty good at. I mean,
That's good.
they are. Okay, you can. I'm not saying they did it, but
No, I think so. And it's you could certainly make the argument that a strategic that a rail bridge is a strategic target. Now you don't hit it when there's a passenger train that could be hit, but that was NATO does that regularly. Remember bombing of Yugoslavia? They did that thing. They hit a bridge, and there was a passenger train on the bridge. They killed, I don't know how many, 30 people who were on the passenger train. And they said, "Hey, we hit a strategically important target. It's a bridge." And he said, "Well, why did you hit it when there was a passenger train on it?" "Well, I mean, that's not our problem. That's the problem of the Serbs. Why are they using a?"
Oh, yeah, blame the victim. Blame the victim.
Exactly.
No, because as the BBC and Al Jazeera and CNN, they have they're having a wonderful day in this news cycle. Okay, fine, that's what you do. But George and I are bringing up much broader issues that are at stake right now. What was the political calculation going into
Right.
Istanbul to make the Russians angry? I mean, really? I mean,
Right. Yeah.
who's the adult in the room? Okay,
Right.
I
Right.
mean, sure. I think the Russians are furious right now. Does that equalize into making a spectacle of yourself in Istanbul? Of course not.
No,
We all.
but this is why. I mean, I've been defending Trump for some time, but I think the last week I've been very disappointed because he started shooting his mouth off about Putin without apparently knowing anything about this attack on his helicopter in Kursk. You want to be really briefed on things before you start saying, "Oh, I'm really pissed off with Putin." I mean, that's quite an important thing that you didn't seem to know about. And so now, you think, hey, these are these negotiations. Hours before the negotiations, you do this. You pull this off, and then you send out this gloating tweet. I mean, is this acting in accord with your desires? And then, but he doesn't seem to say anything. Got nothing to say
Well,
about it.
we could go back to Zelensky's tweet. Who did he write that? Who was that for? Was it for Donald Trump?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think it
Absolutely.
was.
Yeah.
I think it was Donald Trump.
It was
because,
Donald Trump. Yeah.
because one thing everybody has been able, if you love him or hate him, I think everybody we can find consensus on one thing and one thing only. Donald Trump likes to win.
Yep.
Well, he's not getting a win here.
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah. But I think I think it goes back to a point that you made, Peter, which is, and I think it's very, very astute, which is that on most other issues, Trump is setting the agenda. Tariffs, Harvard, the law firms. He sets the agenda. Here, he's just reacting to things. He's just going from one thing to another. He doesn't seem to be setting an agenda. And I find it astonishing. I mean, he's been talking about this since 2022. And yet, you just seem to have no ability to set the agenda, say exactly what it is that you want to see and how you want everyone to comport themselves. And yet you just react to things. Just somebody tells you, oh, Russia has launched this furious attacks on Kiev. Wow, this is outrageous. I mean, what the hell? You're the president. You really, you should be on top of this. And then he's,
just as an addition to this, having American private mercenaries working with the Israelis to give aid to Gaza. Do you know what the global look of that is? Has anybody told him? There are armed Americans with their faces covered firing their guns in Gaza.
No.
Do you know what that, Mr. President, do you know what that looks like?
Right. That's right.
To the world?
That's right. That's right. Now, Now the thing was about this meeting in Istanbul.
Are you watching a news feed with one of your eyes?
No, I'm not. Are you?
No, well, no, but I could. I can get my computer out of here.
All I learned just before we came on was that the meeting is over, but I haven't heard any.
Well, it'll be interesting, and now we can just do our inside baseball stuff because it's fun. I'm not particularly concerned what happened during this meeting. What I'm going to be most concerned about if there's going to be another meeting. Okay, that's the way I look at it.
No, I quite agree. But I thought what was striking is that Ukraine presented its memorandum prior to the meeting, which was quite strikingly absolutist. It's like
Well, and it's absolutely unprofessional as well because they presented it publicly because it was absolutist because they want a rejection. Okay,
Right.
So
Right.
all over the last couple of weeks, you hear this phrase all the time. Dealing or negotiating in good faith. That is such a bad faith approach. Okay.
Right.
So what the Zelensky crowd and his backers, they're appealing with negative returns, in my opinion, to public opinion.
Right.
The Russians say we'll have a memorandum, we'll give it to the other side when we sit down. That's the point.
Right. That's it. Right? And that's why the Russians did not disclose their terms. Even though, remember, we were talking about the other day about Keith Kellogg. Oh, they should disclose it. No, the Russians said we will disclose it at the meeting. It'll take them 3 minutes to glance through it. So it's like,
I'm sure it has bullet points.
Exactly. It's not like something the size of War and Peace. I mean, it's going to be quite short memorandum. But here was this I think just loony presentation from Ukraine. And it was published by in full by Reuters, and here it says that a full and unconditional ceasefire, obviously on sky, land, and sea, as a necessary background and prerequisite for peace negotiations. Well, again, obviously, Russians have already said no to that. Confidence building measures addressing humanitarian issues, unconditionally return all deported and illegally displaced Ukrainian children, exchange of all prisoners, the all for all principle, release by Russia of all civilian hostages. Um, Prisoners don't get exchanged until everything is over. Once you've already signed all the agreements, that's the moment that there's an exchange of prisoners.
Or it could be the start of the implementation of something, of a process, as a confidence building measure. But yeah, I mean, just all of this has to be done before we can even negotiate. No,
Right, but like even when you recall, let's say the Paris peace accords between America and North Vietnam, it was some time before the American POWs started returning. I mean, I remember it was in March, late March of 1973, so that was already 2 months later.
73, everyone. George, when did the peace negotiations start?
They started in 1968 and concluded in January 1973.
Exactly.
Yeah. But there were no releases during that time. And then he said, oh, yeah, hold on. I didn't read that. The non-repetition of aggression. The aim of the negotiations is to restore a permanent basis for lasting peace and security and to assure that aggression does not occur again.
Do you know what that means? I don't. What does that mean?
I have no idea. I mean, aggression, it's already not exactly the terminology that you're going to go into in good faith negotiations. Security guarantees and engagement of the international community. Ukraine must receive robust security guarantees. It has to be robust. The parties will invite the international community to participate in the negotiations and provide guarantees to ensure the implementation of the agreements. Sovereignty, Ukraine is not forced to be neutral. It can choose to be part of the Euro-Atlantic community and move towards EU membership. Ukraine's membership in NATO depends on consensus within the alliance. No restrictions may be imposed on the number, deployment, or other parameters of the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as on the deployment of troops of foreign states on the territory of Ukraine. So that.
So, yeah. I mean, to use the common term, carrots and sticks. So, where's the carrot here for the Russians? I mean, why?
Well, this is what's very strange, because this is something, they had agreed to this in Istanbul. Now, the situation is much worse for Ukraine now than it was 3 years ago. So it would be strange why you're now insisting on something much harsher than you were ready to agree to in the spring of 2022. No restrictions on arms, no restrictions on foreign forces, and then you say, well, the only limitation is, what do other NATO member states think?
But there's not even mention of what's most important is the realities on the ground. There's no mention of it.
No. That's right. So then it continues that no restrictions may be imposed on the number, deployment, or other parameters of the armed forces of Ukraine, as well as the deployment of friendly foreign states on the territory of Ukraine. No restrictions on the deployment of troops of friendly foreign states on the territory of Ukraine. In other words, NATO forces. No restrictions on the deployment of NATO forces in Ukraine. Territorial gains made by Russia since February 2014 are not recognized by the international community. The contact line is the starting point for negotiation. Territory issues are discussed only after a full and unconditional ceasefire. Some sanctions may be lifted from Russia, but in stages and only gradually, with a mechanism for resuming sanctions if necessary. Snapback. Frozen Russian sovereign assets are used for reconstruction or remain frozen until reparations are paid. Implementation. Agree on a clear, balanced, and achievable roadmap for implementation and enforcement of the agreements. And then next step, agreeing ceasefire and agenda of the leaders' meeting. After the meeting in Istanbul, the parties continue the talks, which shall focus on, well, full and unconditional ceasefire, its modalities and monitoring. 2, confidence building measures. 3, preparation, agreeing agenda on the structure of future leaders' negotiations on key topics. And then negotiations to be held with the US and Europe participating. And then the ceasefire, full unconditional ceasefire on the land, on sky, land, and sea for at least 30 days, with the possibility of rolling extensions. And then ceasefire monitoring led by the US and supported by third countries.
There's not one word about peace.
No, none at all. And then we have obviously again the confidence building measures, successful exchange of POWs, and then agreement on unconditional return by the Russian Federation of all deported and displaced Ukrainian children released by Russians of civilian prisoners, and then the leaders of Ukraine and Russia meet to agree on key aspects of final settlements, key topics of peace agreements to be agreed by the leaders, permanent and complete cessation of hostilities, security guarantees for non-repetition of aggression, territorial issue, economy, compensation, reconstruction, penalties for breach of agreements, conclusions to a final agreement. But now, the problem with all that is why would Russia agree to any of that? I mean, it's just like this is basically a wish list. You say, okay, well, I'm quite sure that's what you would like, but there's nothing here which would provide Russia with any guarantees that you're not going to use the interim period of these negotiations, which are going nowhere, precisely to rearm, reconstitute your forces, and restart.
This is asking Russia to accept a strategic defeat in the face of NATO. That's all it's saying.
That's right. Exactly. That's a NATO wish list. Yeah, that's it. That's what we would like. So looking at that, you have to think, well, maybe that's what Russia said. I mean, as you were saying earlier, that when they arrived in Istanbul, I mean, there's no real point in continuing with these talks. I mean, we're just this isn't going anywhere.
Also, I don't want to make a strong connection at this point because we don't have any evidence. But if I'm right, basically saying, look, this is what we talked about in Istanbul in 2022. We're talking about Istanbul plus, okay, meaning accepting what's happened on the ground. Would that be presented with the mind or with the thought that the Trump administration is not people that Russia can deal with? I mean, again, going back to the first part of our podcast, hitting those airfields is part of Russia's strategic defense.
Right.
That is, people like to use the word red line. I mean,
right.
This is not even a line we talk about.
Right.
This is how serious it is. I shouldn't be, but I'm disappointed. But I shouldn't be. This should be talked about more, okay? Right. And it's not. Right. And this shows the lack of any good faith. Okay, they know Trump wants this over because he doesn't like it. He doesn't understand it. It's Biden's all the things that we've heard.
Right.
But Russia can't afford to think that way. Okay,
no,
not to do anybody a favor.
This is why,
particularly, as George has pointed out, and I absolutely am convinced of this, that caper could not have been proceeded without very high level sensitive Western intelligence. I'm sorry.
Exactly, sensitive Western intelligence. The whole thing was very, very cleverly planned. I mean, in other words, they didn't just use drones, from Ukraine. I mean, they knew that they had to locate these trucks close to the air bases to conceal the nature of the trucks. And of course, they had to know where the air bases were. They had to know where the aircraft was located. This was clearly given to them they had to be by the United States. It's the United States that's that is the co-signatory with Russia of the New START treaty. It's the United States that knows the exact location of Russian strategic bombers. So therefore, that had to have been the United States that provided. Now, I actually do think, and I said it earlier, that they didn't inform Trump about this. I think you don't when you do these things, you don't inform the
Well,
president. It's just
it
basically.
might
You need president needs plausible deniability.
it might explain what we heard. I don't know if it was Trump that truthed it or whatever, but some very bad things are going to happen.
That's right. He said that. That's exactly what he said. That's right.
Okay,
He didn't say some bad things are going to happen. He said that thanks to me, what Putin doesn't realize that because of me, some really bad things haven't happened to Russia. So that's kind of the way he formulated it. That somehow, thanks to me, that I'm saving Russia from these bad things.
But see, depending on how this all comes out, because we're getting more information with every minute that passes, but Trump is on the verge of losing. He's getting 0 for 2 here. He's going to lose, I think, improving U.S.-Russia relations. It doesn't mean they have to get worse. Okay, I just don't think they're going to get much better. It's plateaued. Okay,
Right.
And if I'm right, the Ukrainians were given the riot act. I mean, what's the point of meeting then?
Right.
So
Right.
that's lose-lose.
But this is why I think I find it very troubling that Trump didn't issue a statement yesterday saying, first of all, hey, you don't want to mess with strategic bombers. That's a serious business. You don't want to hit those. And I don't think it's a good idea to do this on the eve of peace talks. He could have easily said that yesterday. He didn't. Keeping silent isn't a good look for him, particularly as he was shooting his mouth off last week about how angry he was with the Putin. Now remember, Trump did this also at the time of the May 9th commemoration. You remember Zelensky was issuing all sorts of threats that he was going to launch kind of a drone attack on May the 9th, when he knew that there'd be a lot of important foreign dignitaries there. And again, that would have been an opportunity for Trump to say, you don't want to start lobbing drones when you got Xi Jinping is going to be there. That's a serious business. He kind of didn't say anything, and again, he kind of missed the boat there. Anyway, but I was just want to point out that Lindsay, loathsome Lindsay, was he went to Brussels today. So he was in Ukraine. I think it was yesterday or the day before. He was there with Richard Blumenthal, and then he met Ursula von der Leyen, which itself is very interesting. I mean, why would Lindsey Graham, who's just a senator from South Carolina, be meeting Ursula von der Leyen? And then here's the readout. The president, that's Ursula von der Leyen, made the objective clear. We need a real ceasefire. We need Russia at the negotiating table, and we need to end this war. Pressure works as the Kremlin understands nothing else. This is why the president welcomed Senator Graham, committed to ramping up pressure on Russia and moving ahead with this bill in the Senate next week. The EU is preparing its 18th package of hard-biting sanctions. She's always with the hard-hitting, hard-biting.
Yeah, I think Lindsay has this biting fetish.
Targeting Russia's energy revenues, including Nord Stream infrastructure, Russia's banking sector, and lowering the crude oil price cap. And then these.
As peace negotiations are going on.
That's right. That's peace negotiation. You can see how committed
Yeah, he
Ursula and Lindsay are to peace. These steps, taken together with US measures, would sharply increase the joint impact of our sanctions, said President von der Leyen. Combined with actions targeting Russia's shadow fleet, limiting Russia's ability to transport its oil, it's an effective measure to dry up Kremlin's resources to wage the war. And then President von der Leyen and Senator Graham also discussed the issue of 20,000 abducted Ukrainian children and possible further pressure on Russia. So
it's very interesting. They keep because it's driving at your heartstrings. There, the children. Well, that has been so definitively debunked. I don't even know why they keep bringing it up.
right,
Okay.
right. Yeah, no, we have to. You always have
Primarily
to.
children from the Donbass, from Donetsk and Lugansk, that were taken out of a hostile environment. Basically, the Kiev regime bombing civilians in the Donbass. They were evacuated to Russia.
Also, Russia said repeatedly that anybody who wants to go back can go
Well,
back.
we talked about that the guy that turned 18, and he said he wanted to go to Ukraine. They said, go
They
ahead.
said, you want to return, or any parents who say, parents or guardians who have a legal claim to anyone, they make an application and a child will be returned to parents or legal guardians. You have to at least prove that you are the parent and the legal guardian. So yeah, that's right. But that's a very interesting question. What exactly is Lindsey Graham doing here?
Well, I don't know. Can you spell spoiler? I mean, obviously.
Spoiler. That's absolutely right. He goes there. It's going to spoiler. Sounds to me as if he was probably in on the know about the upcoming attack, and then he meets with Ursula von der Leyen, and then they're talking about his sanctions package. Why is she talking to Lindsey Graham about his sanctions package? I mean that he's in Congress. He's doing whatever he's doing in Congress. She should be dealing with the administration. I mean, why are you talking to somebody who really doesn't have any? He doesn't have any executive functions. I mean, he can adopt any resolution he likes, but ultimately it'll be up to the president whether he's going to enforce.
Well, I mean, people like to use the phrase. I'll use it because most everybody knows what it means or what it implies. Is that Lindsey Graham's just the spokesperson for the deep state.
He is. He is. Absolutely.
He's taken that mantle. Okay.
That's right. But there again, I think Trump is showing weakness in not cracking down on Lindsey Graham. And this is, it's not. This isn't a matter of politeness. I mean, look at Trump. If he doesn't like someone within his own party, he makes his feelings clear. Thomas Massey, who I think is a very good guy, is a decent guy. Trump threatens him, and he said, "I'm going to primary Thomas Massey," and who's actually one of the best.
Well, I mean, everyone. Let's use historical comparisons. Lyndon Johnson wouldn't tolerate it. Richard Nixon wouldn't tolerate it. They're two very different presidents from different parties. Okay. Why Trump doesn't rein him in is a mystery. It's a mystery to me why Keith Kellogg keeps shooting off his mouth the way he does. He's really an embarrassment. I mean, he really is, he's an artifact from the 80s and 90s.
Right.
I mean, I think he still thinks the Soviet Union exists. Seriously.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure that's right. So one other piece of news, I don't think it's even worth talking very much about, but we at least should mention it, is there's a new Polish president, Karol Nawrocki, and there's usually all the usual crowd at Politico. Oh my God, a right wing, a far right, hard right, extreme right, MAGA, Trumpian, has taken over in Warsaw. And Ukraine. What's going to happen to Ukraine now? Navratsky is, of course, like all Poles, he's absolutely besotted with hatred for Russia. So he believes in supporting Ukraine to the hilt. He apparently is not enthusiastic, about sending Polish troops to fight in Ukraine, but of course neither is Tusk enthusiastic about the idea. He also isn't very enthusiastic about Poland joining NATO, and he's not very enthusiastic about Poland joining the EU for obvious reasons. I mean, Poland was badly hit. Polish agriculture was badly hit with the
and that
dumping
is
of
his electorate.
yeah,
Those
exactly.
are his voters.
Exactly. But nonetheless, there seems to be a lot of hair being pulled out that somehow the commitment to Ukraine is in jeopardy. I mean, anyone who knows anything about the Poles, I mean, they're not going to. If there's a fight to be had against the Russians, they're always going to do it. But as long as somebody else is doing the fighting, they're not getting involved in fighting themselves.
Poles have a deep, deep dislike of Ukrainians because they see them as people lacking culture. Which I think George can attest to this. I mean, in Eastern Europe, if you say to someone you don't have culture, that's like saying "F you."
That's right.
I mean, you would just like, oh, okay. I mean, it would just, like water off the back of a duck. But in Eastern Europe and in Russia, you say you have no culture. Those are fighting words.
Those are fighting words. The Russian word is "nekulturny." If you translate it as having no culture, it doesn't mean anything because it just sounds okay. He doesn't like going to art galleries or concerts, but that's not quite what "nekulturny" means. It means you're a barbarian. You just have no breeding, no education. That's you're just somebody not worth associating with. So if you say that he's just simply a barbarian.
But I didn't finish. So they think the Ukrainians are kulturny, but they hate Russians. Okay, so I mean, there you go. Okay,
that's right.
There's the spectrum. Okay.
It is an interesting question. Almost from the beginning, that when you think of really the origins of OUN and Bandera, and it was in Poland. I mean, that was where that movement was launched, and the first targets of their assassinations and terror campaign were Poles. They weren't assassinating Russians; they were assassinating Poles, and so really. This is a very strange kind of alliance that they formed, given all of the animus that exists between them, particularly when you get onto World War II and the mass killings in Volhynia and everywhere else, which the Poles do remember. So it's always been a kind of a strange bedfellows against Russia. But I think it's just as long as we both hate the Russians, then we'll let bygones be bygones. But there's also the other aspect, and we talked about it before, is the Poles are not happy about all these Ukrainians coming in, because they come in and they're entitled to all sorts of government benefits, and the Poles aren't really happy. I mean, they're coming in, they're getting government benefits, and then they can go back and do whatever they want to do in Ukraine, and then they come back to collect their government benefits. that doesn't sound right.
You come back to pick up your check. Yeah. And those are, that's hard currency. Okay, it's not the grivna. Okay, I mean, it's something meaningful. Yeah, I mean, it's an untenable situation. It cannot last long. But George, I think George and I have kind of set it up in the correct way. It's a hierarchy of what you dislike most. Okay, it's kind of weird. Okay, yes. It's a weird way of analyzing politics. But I was watching the election returns. I mean, it flipped at the end.
Yes, that's right. Because I thought that.
The guy that lost, I mean, he was taking a victory lap at one point.
Yes, it was very interesting because those early exit polls were showing, oh, good, the guy we want, the Tusk guy, the liberal mayor of Warsaw who hates the restrictions on abortion and everything. And, in other words, he's for all the good things that we're all supposed to stand for, LGBTQ plus. He's heading for victory. So there's going to be another Romania. And then he kind of flipped it. So it's interesting how the exit polls got it wrong, which always kind of makes me a little bit always suspicious when the result is the opposite of what the exit polls say. That same thing happened with Fitzo. Remember, also, Fitzo lost.
Well,
The EU
because
liberal guy won.
because
Yeah,
polling agencies are all liberal.
exactly.
And
Yeah,
so, again, what starts in America goes to Europe, is
that's
that
right.
people will lie to you on the phone
Yes,
because it's almost all done by the phone.
that's
Okay.
right. Exactly.
And plus everybody in major cities in Poland, it's very, a lot of Polish cities are quite modern. They have telephones. In rural areas, not so much.
Right.
There's a lot of rural areas that are very poor in Poland still to this
Yes,
day.
that's right. That's right. That's right. So we have some comments on our locals page. This is the locals page, where is supervised by Buddy and Apple. They want to make sure that people are contributing, and that they continue to be fed, because they're worried about going hungry one day. Um, so here we have Real Peter Nolan says, I think Russia will go to the river. And I've said for the 2 years now, the attack was a very bad idea. And then he goes on, after yesterday, I think the comments from the Russians will be something akin to hell no. Um, yeah, well, I mean, I guess that's close to your view, Peter, that you think that the Russians just came, made their positions known, and that was that. They just walked away.
Well,
Which
where can we go?
right,
Where do we go?
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah. I mean, at this,
Look, like I've used the word spectacle twice already. I mean, this is all. I mean, the entire Western approach to this proxy war has been based on narratives. Okay, and the Russians, the way they've approached this is to, there's an objective way of going to achieve it. Now, if you want to negotiate that in good faith, we're willing to do it. They did it in March and April of 2022. And so if Lindsey Graham is actually, your advisor and his team, who did they write that for you? Your a maximalist approach? I
right,
mean,
right,
it just what is the point? What is the point? Because I get tired of saying it. It's mocked in Western media. I've watched it. The root causes, everybody else, root causes. Well, that's what it is. Okay.
right,
No NATO troops,
yep,
neutrality, no NATO infrastructure.
right,
Russian speakers, Russian ethnic Russians, they have to have at least equal rights in the country. They cannot be a persecuted minority. And then, as George rightfully pointed out a few days ago, and I think it's a prescient point, and I think George is the only person that has actually mentioned it, is that, oh yeah, well, Ukraine will sign up to protect the Russian minority. Well, they don't even do that in the EU. And Ukraine isn't a member of the EU. Okay, so why would the Russians believe that? Oh, by the
yeah,
way, the Russians want an investigation of what happened in Odessa in the trade union building. But people still remember that here, George,
that's right,
vividly.
that's right. But that was very
I,
very
I,
funny.
just, I just don't know where we go.
Yep,
Okay, because we had this spectacle over the weekend, and it was a spectacle. It was extraordinary. Let's be honest, okay? But what does it change on the ground? And what advantage does Ukraine have based on this spectacle? None.
right, right. No, I think that's the thing. I think the plan, and I'm sure that's what Lindsay was saying when he was in Kiev, is you need to persuade Trump. I know Trump. I'm good friends with him. I'm a golfing buddy of his. And the thing with Trump is he wants to back a winner. You have to show that you're a winner. You have to show that you can pull off spectacular feats like this, and Trump will be persuaded by it. He'll think, "Hey, this is cool. And, hey, this is really nice. You went to these, you let these drones out right close to these air bases. Oh, I didn't think you could pull this thing off." And that's probably what Lindsay told him. That'll impress Trump. And then Trump will say, "Okay, well, let's send him more money. Looks like Zelensky isn't quite as pathetic as I thought he was." I'm sure Lindsay said something like that to Zelensky. But
Wow. George is like doing a Vulcan mind meld with Lindsey Graham right now. Really cool. I think you're right.
That's right, and which is why Trump is just letting this whole thing slip out of
Because he
control.
doesn't know what to do. He has no idea what to do. I mean,
Yeah,
I think that is one of the reasons. Okay, Witkoff is kind of like his, you know, he's like that guy with the caddy.
right.
Trump might be on the field with Lindsay or Musk and all that, but then when they're going to the next green, he looks over it. What do you think, Steve? Give me a read. What do you think?
Right.
Okay, I think
Right.
that's that kind of dynamic.
Right.
Okay, because we have no evidence. I think we can say this with absolute certainty now. Since the inauguration to today, we have no idea. I think you can say that Trump really has no idea what to do. I really believe that now.
Right. Right. No, I think so, because um, and really, it shouldn't be too difficult for him. He could absolutely, formulate what he would like to see, and stick to that. But he hasn't. He really is just going from one thing to another, and yeah, he doesn't really know what to do. And I think once he loses control of this, and essentially,
Or George, maybe if I can, as he's losing control of
as
this,
he's losing control of this, sure, he will, it will be seen that this was really one of your signature promises. You went to rally after rally and said you're going to bring this thing to an end. It doesn't matter. Is that 24 hours? Okay, that no one took that seriously. No one, you don't take Trump seriously when he says 24 hours. But nonetheless, you made people think that you would do it. Now no one's really, you're not persuading anyone. And
well,
the
let
fact
be
that
honest. Be
you've
honest
got
with
this
me.
meeting in Istanbul, and you're not throwing your weight behind it and making clear to Ukraine, your client, that you can't go into this meeting with these absolutist demands. I mean, that's just not point. I mean, of course, it's just going to break up within a few minutes. I mean, you're just wasting everyone's time.
I think I can't pinpoint the moment, but there was a certain time, I think a couple of weeks ago, that I hit my own plateau. It's like, why am I micromanaging following this? I'm not getting anything. As a matter of fact, it just gets more and more confusing,
Right.
and it's listless. And again, I don't want what happened over the weekend was dramatic. It was a spectacle. I'm not going to make my final assessment on this based on what happened on Sunday. No, I'm not going to do that. Okay, that's not good. That's not good analysis. Okay, but it does kind of tell me. It goes back to with Reagan and Iran Contra. Remember, if you did know, you're a fool. If you didn't
Right.
know,
Right.
you're a fool. Okay, or
Right.
something along those lines. It kind of works that way a little bit with me because the and Donald Trump, you didn't know. Well, what about the Iran negotiations? What do you not know about those?
Right. Right.
I mean,
But I think
there's a lot of implications here.
right, but the what you just said is very important, because Iran Contra is the precise analogy, which is that this was a covert operation. What they were involved in, they transferred arms to Iran, and the profits from these sales of arms to Iran were then transferred to the Contras. Now, these were two covert operations, And they made sure, and this was said, this expression was used by Admiral Poindexter, who was then the national security advisor to Reagan. Did you tell the president about this? No, I didn't tell the president. Why didn't you tell the president? Because of plausible deniability. She said in this, yeah, because I don't think the president should have known about this. These are covert operations, and I think that is true. I mean, when you intelligence services, when they perform very, some nasty operations, they really don't tell the president about it, and the president doesn't ask about it. That's you don't want to put him in a position where he knows about it, and then he has to lie, pretend that he didn't know, or he doesn't know about it, and then he looks like a fool. So you just basically you don't let him know, and I think that's
Yeah, but
I mean,
I see your point. It's crystal clear. But there's been this clamoring in the Zelensky camp and all of their followers and supporters in the West that there should be a meeting of the three principles of
right.
Zelensky, Putin, and Trump. Well, if you're Putin, I mean, have you told Trump everything before we sit down? I mean, it has implications, George, and really important ones. Iran-Contra, yeah, that was nasty business. Okay, it was covert and all that, but it wasn't the geopolitical significance of politically. It was really
That wasn't
damaging, but
right.
strategically, geopolitically, it goes on all of the time as we speak. Okay, but that
Right.
didn't include the United States and then the Soviet Union, or today Russia. I think that is different.
Right. No, I agree. I think that's a much more significant development, and I think that would lead me to think that if they had informed Trump, he would probably have vetoed it. So I think they probably, went out of the way not to tell him. I think he would have vetoed it. I mean, he would have said, "Hey,
I
that's
think
a really
you're right.
bad idea. I don't want to sign off on something that is so reckless and something that could just easily spin out of control." So that's why I think they probably went out of the way not to tell him, so that just hey, he'll find out about it at the same time as everyone else did. Um,
Yeah, well, as you point out, George, I mean, it is odd. I'm not going to make it into a conspiracy or anything, but it's really odd that Trump likes to spout off on so many things all the time. And I mean, as we're speaking, maybe he's said something, but I mean, it's really quite odd.
Very
It's
odd, very odd. I think because I kept checking his Truth Social page throughout yesterday evening and this morning, and there's nothing there. And you think, hey, you know, these negotiations are taking place. These are the negotiations that you encourage. You were the one who was pressing for these negotiations, and you don't have anything to say about something like this taking place a few hours before the negotiations, particularly as you were going on and on last week about how issuing all sorts of threats against Putin. So
Okay,
that
let me ask you a question then. Okay. My working hypothesis, which can be maybe demolished in a matter of hours, but my working hypothesis, as we're speaking right now at 6:18 p.m. Moscow time, is that I think the Russians are just said, look, this is the best you're going to get from us. Okay. I suppose the memorandum will be released to the public. I can
right,
guarantee you, George and I already know 98% of it. Okay.
right, right,
There are no secrets there.
right,
So that format collapses.
right.
This a could defeat for Trump? And what does that mean?
I think so. I think if that's it, if in other words, if after today they don't schedule another meeting, then you'd have to say, yeah, it's a defeat for Trump, because then if then he throws his weight behind Lindsey Graham's sanctions bill. And that's what he was doing in with Ursula von der Leyen. He's saying, yeah, the sanctions are coming. Trump is going to get behind these sanctions. If he throws his weight behind it, well, that's it. That's his signature foreign policy issue, the thing that he campaigned on, and that he said only I can bring peace. That'll be gone. And then I think his presidency will. I mean, he'll survive. But I think his presidency will just stagger to a kind of inconsequential conclusion.
And what
Up
his
until now, we were thinking, okay, well, maybe he can pull this off. He enjoys a certain reputation in Moscow. Up until now, the Russians have been very, very respectful towards him. They never said one negative thing about him. On the contrary, always very positive about him. So after this, it's hard to see that they're going to say anything positive about him.
well, if we're right, then the huge pile-on will turn into a flood, because there are people, the Lindsey Grahams, the Republican establishment, the rhinos, all of that. They will feel emboldened,
Right.
and the MAGA will feel betrayed. Not a
No
good.
question.
That's a perfect storm for disaster.
That's right. And and emboldened also means that there's likely to be more and more of these escalatory military actions. I mean, within days, we had the attack on the helicopter, on Putin's helicopters. Now we have
Over the weekend, this didn't work very well.
right, right.
Okay, because
Yeah,
taking precautions.
that's right. That's right. So then all bets are off as to what happens. Anyway, so here we have DJ 53. Oh, okay, yeah. DJ 53144 says Alistair C is the smart money on the attack. I don't know
Yes,
what
I
this.
watched it. I watched it. It was very good. It's very good.
Okay. And then Real Peter Nolan says, if Trump did not know, then the CIA is out of control and needs to be shut down. Putin will presume that Trump knew. I don't know whether Putin will presume it. I think Putin will probably be thinking, just as we're thinking, that there may well be people who are going out of their way not to disclose everything to Trump. We saw that last week. He didn't seem to know about the attack on Putin's helicopter, and so I don't think Putin will assume, oh, he knew about this. I think that would be a dangerous assumption.
Let's keep in mind, everyone, is that they look at the administration. They don't personalize it like, we're going to put our money on Trump. They don't think that way. They think, is this administration open to a thaw in relations and some kind of rapprochement on a very basic level? Basic. I mean, not like excellent relations. No, I mean, just normal. Can we talk to each other without screaming? Level of relations. Okay, and I think, again, I don't want to be apocalyptic here and totalistic, but it bodes very badly for with this paper, this spectacle, because the Russians are going to say, "Who are we talking to? Are these people? Are they the decision makers?" Okay, it has a lot less to do with personalities. George is right. Over the last few months, the Kremlin is bent over backwards to be very civil and respectful. Okay, that's part of their diplomacy. Okay, but
I mean, I think the one caveat there is that they do think about Trump. Trump is a kind of an unusual personality. I mean, he's not.
We all have to.
Yeah, therefore, it's not like, oh, it doesn't matter whether it's Trump or or whoever. So with Trump, yeah, it does matter. Trump is a unique figure.
But there may be a difference between Trump and his administration. That's one of the things I'm trying to
get. That's right.
Right, we don't have more questions. So sorry, George and I went off on the mouth here today.
That's right. Anyway, the Stone River. Thank you very much, Stone River. It says, I don't see how the commander-in-chief can escape responsibility ex post, if nothing else. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. I mean, you're right. I mean, in any legal terms, the commander-in-chief will be responsible for what is done in his name. But the thing is, though, with covert operations, is that ultimately it's people. They undertake these things. Legally, what happens, in a court of law, okay, that's a different issue. But politically, ultimately, it does make a difference as to whether it's an underling who makes the decision or is the president. So when we had Iran-Contra, I mean, of course, ultimately, the responsibility was Reagan's. But historians have more or less accepted. Look, Reagan really didn't know about what was going on in his White House. I think that the people who organized the Iran-Contra was Admiral Poindexter, Oliver North. They went off doing their thing, and they made sure not to put Reagan in trouble, because if they had told Reagan about this, Reagan would probably have been impeached. I mean, they kind of saved Reagan from impeachment. I mean, he was in a perilous position, 86, 87, because it looked they're going to impeach him. But because ultimately they had that joint House Senate hearings and said, well, Reagan didn't know about it. I mean, they kept this away from him, so you can't really impeach him because he had at most you can say he was asleep at the switch. He didn't run the White House as he should have done. But there's nothing here that he did which is criminally culpable. So that's that's I think the difference. And then DJ, thank you so much. He says, I heard that Michelin was publishing a guide to NATO buffets. Eat free and be free in Europe. Your guide to NATO buffets. It's very interesting. I mean, I wonder whether what the NATO buffets consist of. I mean, Peter, you're kind of more of an expert than I am on this, but I suspect that they're very nice. If you're one of these NATO ministers, you probably look forward to the buffets.
Well, I mean, no, I think if you're like one step below one of the NATO ministers and you have to go to all of them, oh my God. They say, well, I just won the lottery. Okay, I'm going to be fed all of the time. Okay, they have all these, like, what's it called? It's called the B what?
The B9. That's right. The B9.
The benign people. Okay.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, I'm sure that's very nice. And I wonder when they have these dinners, because that's when you have wines. They think, I wonder what wines they're laying on. Imagine they're sitting there at this conference table, and the things that these. What are they thinking about? They're thinking about. I wonder if they're going to have that same delicious Sauvignon Blanc that I had last time.
That was a good year, 87.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that one. Yeah. And here Brian puts in a headline from the New York Post: Ukraine wipes out dozens of Russian doomsday nuclear bombers in massive surprise attack.
And that's a good thing? And that's a good thing?
Exactly.
Now, again, I think a lot of people are missing the point. This has crossed the line into Russia's strategic defense. That is literally going into the area of the unthinkable. I don't think these people understand the seriousness of it, because the Russians do.
That's right. And we had a question from Judy Hotchkiss, our good friend Judy, always has really interesting things to say. And so Judy, and thank you for your generosity, says from Reuters yesterday, Lavrov Rubio discussed settlement of the war in Ukraine. I read that the Rubio readout was minimal. I mean, there's just simply, they had a conversation. I mean, that was the Russian foreign ministry that was a bit more detailed, but they didn't get into the details of what happened yesterday. So, but it says, this is from Reuters. The Russian foreign ministry said that during the conversation, Rubio expressed condolences over the deaths that occurred when the two bridges were blown up. Yeah, that's from the Russian readout. Nothing in the American readout in the separate Russia. So yeah, that's true. I mean, according to the Russian readout, Rubio did express condolences over the deaths of the civilians in the passenger train. But again, strangely absent from the American readout, which is little more than the comment by Tammy Bruce. It was who always seems like a mystery to me why she's in that position.
She's so lost. She is so lost.
Yeah.
For someone that was one of the most opinionated voices he could come across on cable TV, she's just floundering.
Yep. Yeah. Anyway, Judy, thank you so much, as always, for your generosity. So, Peter, any closing thoughts as we
let's see. I guess
happened.
The big question is, will there be a third meeting? And that'll tell us everything.
Yep. Exactly. So we're going to be, that's going to be the key. If there's a third meeting, then at least there's still some hope, some cause for hope anyway. If there's not, then essentially, then I think all bets are off, and who knows what the next step is. Anyway, thank you everybody who joined us. Thank you very much for all your questions, contributions, and the dogs, as usual, are very dissatisfied. But they're always dissatisfied. I mean, you just can't keep them happy. But we will be back same time next Monday, and then tomorrow is my solo. Please join me 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Until then, all the best. See you. Goodbye.